Thanks for having us, everyone. It is great to be here. You have a full cast of catchy characters on site today. So you have myself, I'm Gary. This is Tom. We also have Cheryl, who's going to be, we have a booth on the floor. So if you want to track one of us down, you can't find us, Cheryl will be there. And we also have our CEO and founder, Richard Herring. He's sitting in the back, kind of trying to hide. He's waving a little bit. It is his birthday. I'm going to spare everyone from singing happy birthday to him. But if you see him on the floor, wish him a happy birthday. Special day for all of us at Catchy. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the great introduction. We really appreciate it. We're here to talk about data-driven developer marketing. And the clock has just gone, so I have no idea how long we have. We'll try and make this within the time limit, but we'll see how it goes. So to get started, data-driven marketing is very buzzwordy. I appreciate everyone here not just leaving when you saw that on the session title. For example, we threw this into Google a couple days ago while we were making the slides. Pages and pages of results, all focused on data-driven marketing. And they're all a bit broad and a bit general. Inc., Entrepreneur, Forbes, any publication that is loosely adjacent to business has something on data-driven marketing. And like I said, it tends to get a bit buzzwordy and not mean a lot, especially for those of us who are working in what is a fairly specific niche. Developer marketing is its own field with its own rules, regulations. We all have our same inside jokes. Someone can say, hey, we're going to steer away from the thing of there is no such thing as marketing to developers, and everyone in this room gets it because we are a very niche field. So what we want to do in this session was kind of a challenge to ourselves and the team at Catchy is how can we make an actionable framework that applies to developer marketing programs specifically, that is rooted in building these programs and rooted in data. That was our challenge for ourselves. The worst thing, I know when you hear sponsor session, the worst thing is just thinking, oh, I have to sit here and someone's going to try and sell me something for the next half hour. It's not what we're trying to do. We have a framework. We want to go through it. We're pretty excited. And this is our first time presenting it. So thank you for being our pilot audience for this whole thing. Where does this come from? Again, we're not here to sell you on Catchy. This is the background of what our view is and where this framework comes from. I know a lot of people here work in-house. You work on one program, one brand, one specific element of a brand or a program. For us, we have the good fortune of working across the entire industry. We work with the best and brightest of developer marketing programs. We work with a lot of you. It's great to see some of the familiar faces here. And that gives us this really interesting horizontal view of what's happening across the industry. What's happening over at company A, what's happening at company B, and what are the ways that they're doing this all the way from the beginning of building a program to the highest degree of growth and scale. How are they doing it? How does it work? And what are the best, again, data-driven practices that we can pull from that? So, to get into it, the core of the framework, we built a flywheel, which we think applies to developer marketing programs. And the core of it is built around the assumption that you are involved in some sort of aspect of building a developer marketing program. You could be all the way at the C-suite level, having very hands-on every part of it, or you could be at a huge enterprise organization and only be focused on one aspect of it. What we wanted to do was build a flywheel, a framework, that no matter your experience and no matter where you are in the journey, allows you to have a guide for how to build an end-to-end developer marketing program. And knowing that we have people with wildly different experience levels here. Maybe you've been doing developer marketing for over a decade, or maybe you're here because someone reorged you into a developer marketing role. You've never talked to a developer in your life and you're trying to figure out what's going on. We think we've got a framework here that should have something for everyone. So it goes out, there's varying degrees of complexity as we go out from the middle. At the simplest level, we think that there are 3 phases when you're building a developer marketing program. The first is discovery. This is when you're going in, you're doing your research, your groundwork, and you're building your approach to the market. Who are we talking to? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Then you go live. Then you go into the go-to-market phase where you're going into market. You're trying to reach developers. You're trying to reach your audience. And this is all about increasing awareness. This is all about facilitating consideration. And this is all about developer acquisition, conversion events. Tom will talk a lot about what happens in that phase. And then finally, we have the growth phase. We've got all the building blocks in place. We have our strategy in place. We've gone to market. But now we want to take this to the next level. You could debate the core activities endlessly that go into each of these three phases. For simplicity and the time we have, we've broken it down into 9 different core activities. So each phase has 3 different activities. That is the core of what this presentation is going to be about. What are these 9 different activities that occur at each phase? How can you approach them? What are the activities that you can do when you go into these different phases? And finally, that ultimate level, and the part that a lot of marketers miss and a lot of programs miss, what are the key data points? What are the key pieces of data that you can take away from each of these different categories and that you can use to judge efficacy of each of these categories to know whether or not your program is working? We will send this out after, so if for any reason you aren't able to get a picture of this, we'll send it out with the slides. It will be downloadable on the Catchy website, so we'll give a high-res version to everyone moving away from this. How are we doing on time? Good? All right, I got a thumbs up. That feels good. No worries. So I'll go in and do the discovery phase, and then you will hear from Tom to go through the go-to-market and growth phases. So when we talk about discoveries, the very first place we like to start is stakeholder interviews. And when we talk about the discovery phase, a lot of what we're thinking about in this phase is assessing product market fit. When we're going out and building our developer marketing strategy, we have a product, we have a platform, we have a market, and we are trying to figure out where they come together, what the messaging is around that, and what we want to say, and who we want to talk to when we go out to market. And in all of our years of doing this, Catchy's been doing developer marketing for over 12 years, for over a decade. Our experience shows that 80% of this information exists with people you already have access to. Coded interviews is the best way to do 80% of the legwork of assessing your product market fit. And when we say coded interviews, this is where we start taking qualitative data, turning it into quantitative. So if you're not familiar with them, interviews, go out, pick a selection of people that work within your org, people from the product team, marketing team, sales team, the technical enablement, customer success, interview them. Ask them about the product. Talk to them about what the market fit is. And then go talk to some of your customers. Go talk to developers in the market. Do these interviews, and where we take the qualitative information from those interviews and make it quantitative is by coding. And coding is the act of going in and looking for themes and then counting out how often those themes come up. And it's a really nice way to take pages and pages and pages of qualitative interview and make them quantitative. And kind of an example, I think it's best to show how this comes to life. We worked with a cloud technology platform a handful of years ago. They were getting ready to go to market. They had a product, but they wanted to relaunch it and go to market because they hadn't been getting a lot of traction on the platform. So in green, we first started by talking to the marketing and sales team. What have you gone to market with? What do people want to know? And the data, when we started coding it, it was really easy to see security, control, risk. Everyone was convinced that developers were obsessed with security, and that's all they wanted to talk about with the platform. They wanted to mitigate risk. They wanted better control, speed and agility, and it was all anyone at the org. That's what we do. That is our strategy and how we go to market. But when we started talking to customers, we noticed that the customers weren't talking about security at all. Only 5 people mentioned it in the interviews. When we dug into it a little bit more, it's because they already knew. They're like, no, this is good. We trust the platform does security. It's fine. Yeah, we get it. It's fine. We trust it. That's why, so many people go with this platform. We don't need to hear about security narratives anymore. They were really focused, as a lot of cloud architects are, on performance, problem solving, scale. Is this going to do what you told me it was going to do? Is it not going to break? And can I scale it with our business as it grows? That's all Really helpful exercise to help guide everything we were doing to go to market. And again, it's very different to go to a group of stakeholders and say, hey, we talked to people and this is what they said, therefore this is what we should do. It's much more powerful to get buy-in across your organization if you have a little bit of data around that. And coding is the technique that allows us to do that in the stakeholder interview phase. Secondary research. So as we look at this product market fit Venn diagram, secondary research is a great way to fill out your market understanding. You have a market of developers, of competitors, you're trying to assess what's going on in there. And I think especially for people who are new to the developer marketing space, people very easily get overwhelmed. I don't know developers, I don't know the space, I don't know the tools, the technologies. How am I supposed to understand this audience? But the really nice thing about this niche space and this community that we've started building here is a lot of this information exists out there already. A lot of really smart people like Tom have gone and done the legwork and the homework for you. This is our quick hit guide to what those resources are and where you can find them. If you are looking for demographic data and research, you have a lot of great sources. You have Stack Overflow, who does their annual developer survey. Over 70,000 developers contribute to it. It is so hard. If any of you have tried to do a developer survey, you know how hard it is to get developers to take a survey and give you data. Stack Overflow doesn't have that problem. They have 70,000 developers from around the world who want nothing more than to contribute to this. It is quite possibly the best source of developer research that exists out there, and they redo it every year. It's free. You can go access it. If you don't read it every year, go read it every year. It is fantastic. We also have Slashdata and a handful of other companies that do their annual reports as well. These are very developer research and data heavy companies that publish free versions of their reports. Again, they're out there. They have a lot of the basics in there for you. Go do them, go read them, check out what's in there. Audience insights. This is always, again, something that people tend to get a little worked up over. Where am I going to get audience insights? How can I figure out what developers think about our brand, our platform, our product? Very hard, and it can feel overwhelming to try and find that information. Good news about developers, as a lot of us know, they're very vocal. They're very vocal online. They're working with each other, and they're very open and honest about everything that they're talking about and doing. This happens on Reddit. Happens on Stack Overflow, Hacker News. It happens in your own product forums and support areas. Go and look. Search on Reddit, on Stack Overflow for your brand, your product, your platform, and you will very easily find what developers think. And it's a great starting place, again, to identify some of those attitudes, some of those problems that people are having, and where they're getting stuck and where some of the opportunities are. And finally, competitive analysis. Manual competitive analysis is a great way to do a side-to-side look at what is happening out in the market. Something we do a lot of with our clients. We have a framework that we base it around. We have 6 different points of what we think are important elements of developer marketing programs. And again, the key here is doing the extra bit of work to take what is qualitative observational data and make it quantitative. We rank each of these categories on a score of 1 to 5, and it makes it really easy to do some of these apple to oranges comparisons of where your program sits, of where other programs sit, to do a gap analysis and identify where you may want to go given the data you're seeing. Hey, it looks like we're really strong in 3 areas, we're falling short in 3 more, so here's where we're going to go from there. A couple examples of how this comes to life. The data you're seeing up here on the left is from the Stack Overflow developer report. A lot of people come to us, hey, we're going to launch a campaign on developers. What market should we go into? Where are developers? Turns out a lot of people have done the research there. Stack Overflow has already identified the top 10 populations of where developers are distributed around the world. If you don't have a better idea of where to start, this is a great place to figure out where you may want to target your campaigns or your developer efforts. Again, a lot of that information is out there. Work smarter, not harder. What you're seeing on the right is a little bit of that competitive analysis that we do. So we had a client in the Web3 space who's, hey, we're ready to go to market. We're not quite sure what our branding messaging should look like. What's going on out in the market? We took a look, and you wouldn't believe it, but that is actually 4 different brands that are all competitors in the Web3 space. Very easy once you've done that groundwork and looked around to just be like, oh, everyone looks exactly the same. Maybe we don't want to go to market with something that is blue, white, with splashes of teal. So again, These are easy exercises that take a lot of groundwork, but you're not going to be limited by resources. It just takes the time and the effort to go in and do these rigorous analyses, and you get really good data, which makes your decision making easy as you start building your developer marketing strategy. And with the assumption that I'm close to the end of my time and it's time to turn it over to Tom, I'll go through the last element, which is primary research. This is very focused on product, right? You should have, from stakeholder interviews, from your market research, from your secondary research, a pretty good idea of what's going on, but you may find yourself now with very specific questions about your audience, their views, how they're engaging with a platform or a product. That's where primary research comes in. This is a very simplified guide to primary research and some of the different methodologies you can use to ask some of those kind of final mile questions before you go to market. These are the three that we use the most broadly and are quite helpful. Qualitative research and stakeholder interviews is a type of qualitative research. Observation, interviews, focus groups. This is really helpful for understanding mindset, needs, pain points. What's our audience thinking? Where are they struggling? How do they feel about our brand? All of these questions are really easily answered with qualitative research. As we get into descriptive, this is where you're doing kind of a little bit of what Stack Overflow does. You're getting that large data at scale. This is sample surveys, panel surveys, and it's really great for describing, explaining, or validating some of your research findings. It's great to go into this with a hypothesis that you've developed in doing your stakeholder interviews and said, let's test that. Let's go to market and ask some specific questions from a global developer population and find out if that hunch that we have from the stakeholder interviews is true or not. And that's where you can do that with data at scale. Finally, kind of the deepest level and the really nitty-gritty is this scientific research. And this is where you start running experiments, controlled experiments, field experiments, really trying to, again, isolate if X causes Y. This is where you get to do fun stuff. Hey, we changed our getting started documentation and we want to see if that affects the speed of which a developer can get to hello world. Cool, let's go test it. Let's go watch a bunch of developers do that. Let's time them. Let's see where they're struggling. And again, you can get some data around how that works to inform your decision making. Really simple example here because again, these are very specific questions that you're typically asking with primary research. We had a platform that they were not a US-based company, they wanted to launch in the US, and there was this huge debate going on internally with the client team, with the executive team. Everyone had a feeling about how high awareness was. Some of the executives thought we're a global brand. We're in the Inc. top 20. We're in the Fortune top 20. Everyone in the US knows us and all the developers want to work with us and have low usage and interest. A few other people disagreed with that. And the simplest way was to survey developers in the United States and actually get some categorical data around what was happening. And we found out through that there was pretty low awareness and familiarity with the platform. There was pretty low usage, intent, and interest. And it's really helpful with those specific questions to have data to answer them, to go into a large meeting of decision makers and be like, here's what we found out, therefore, here's what we're going to do. And we don't need to go off our feelings. We can actually find data to inform our decisions. So that was a lot for me. I'm going to take a breath, let Tom take over, and he's going to walk us through the next two phases of this flywheel. Thanks, bud.
Thank you, Gary. Are we on? Before I start, I'm going to jump into the go-to-market phase, but before I do that, I've got a caveat that there's so much contained in these slides that I can't do it justice in the time available. Catchy is running free 30-minute consultations all today and tomorrow, so do come and find us. Love to. This is the stuff I really geek out on, so I'd love to talk to all of you more about it later. Anyway, Gary's given us a great overview of the discovery phase. I'm going to talk now about going to market. And something that we, broadly you can split go-to-market activities into these three buckets. I'll introduce them briefly in turn. Owned are the properties that you have within your organization. They're your website, they're your developer portal, your documentation, your content. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of good content, whether we're talking about case studies, success stories, get started guides. Earned are the channels that really come out of community. I'm not going to dwell on that too long because I want to talk about community a lot in a couple of slides' time. But this is where other people are starting to do that work for you through reviews, through word of mouth, through organic social. And then the third category is paid, which is where you're putting dollars against eyeball impressions. You're putting ads out into market, you're getting display ads, you're paying for search rankings. Now, the key point that I'd really want to make with this slide is that it's not enough to just bundle all of your efforts into paid. And we see this quite a lot, where people think that just getting impressions, getting awareness is enough, and there's over-prioritization of paid. And really, I like to encourage a healthy balance of all three of these buckets. With paid, great for getting you awareness, but when we're thinking about a developer journey, moving down into an evaluation phase or into an adoption phase, paid isn't going to cut it. At that point, you need community, you need resources, you need content. So in terms of how do you measure this, I think being aware of where your spend and where your effort is, and aiming for that sweet spot of approximately equal. And in some of the very best cases, you can even start deprioritizing paid because community and your own channels are doing the hard yards for you. When we're talking about developers evaluating tools, they're not just looking at your product. They're out there evaluating the competition. They're testing multiple different products at the same time. And so just as developers are aware of their various options, it's really important if you're running a developer marketing program that you're aware of the competitive landscape. There's many more than what's on this slide, many more initiatives that we could talk about. But for today, I want to focus on these three. The first being share of voice. So this is something that you can actually measure. You can aggregate data from Twitter, from Reddit, from Stack Overflow, and understand when developers are talking about a given topic, how much of that conversation includes mention of your program and your competitors. And if you track this over time, you can be aware of whether that's diminishing or whether you're growing in terms of your share of that developer conversation. The second bucket is quite literally the sentiment of those mentions of your developer program. Are they positive? Are they negative? And this is really useful at both a macro and a micro level. At a macro level, you want to map that trend over time. Are those mentions generally getting more favorable or less favorable? And that can yield some insight into the quality of your developer experience, something I'll talk about in a couple of slides' time. So that's at a macro level, but then at a micro level, this can be really good for yielding some tactics. For example, just anecdotally, we were working with a company and we were observing that among the negative sentiment bucket, there are a lot of mentions of, okay, great, I get the proposition, I get the features. What can you actually do with this? Where's the success stories? Where's the case studies? And that yielded a really great, rich content project that started going out, speaking to developers and telling these success stories, which is a really important part of that evaluation process. Last bucket is something quite different, but if you're an organization that perhaps doesn't have a culture of awareness around developer marketing or developer programs, this can be really important for securing internal buy-in. You might have a tiny developer marketing budget, but if you're able to aggregate these buckets on the slide and say, okay, our competitor has got a huge share of voice. Their budget is enormous. How do you expect us to compete with them directly? That's quite a useful tool. So this is a manual piece of research, and we go out and we'll evaluate not only the size of this budget, but where are our competitors spending? Is it headcount? Is it events? Is it content? And like I say, that's a really valuable piece of information for securing internal buy-in. The other two are a bit more programmatic than that. We can aggregate data from multiple sources, Twitter, Reddit, Stack Overflow, etc. And this is a service that Catchy runs called the Developer Signal Hub, where we're producing reports on a systematic basis, aggregating information from all of those platforms, showing share of voice, sentiment analysis, turning all of these conversations into something that we can measure. Developer acquisition. I feel quite strongly about this one because one does not simply acquire developers. But all that said, we want developers to come into our programs and start using them. So for the purpose of this slide, we'll talk about developer acquisition. Something that is surprising but very common when we work with developer marketing programs is the fact that organizations don't always have a shared understanding internally as to what do we mean by an acquired developer. I'll give you 3 examples. An acquired developer could be someone who's come in and registered for an account. It could also be somebody who has made a set number of API calls. Or it could be someone who's converted from a free tier to a paid tier. All of those are valid measures of what counts as a developer in our program. But unless you've reached consensus internally, then the notion of measuring developer acquisition becomes a bit of a non-starter. Second, and closely related, is whatever metric you decide on, you've got to be able to measure that. Our marketing director, Joey, would never forgive me if I didn't mention that once you've decided that metric, you need to add tracking pixels. You need to be able to actually quantify this so that we can measure over time how's the program doing. And the third one is all of these logos around the outside. These represent different routes, different touch points from which developers are coming into your program. There's a lot of data being produced by all of these platforms, and something we encounter surprisingly frequently is this sort of fragmented data landscape around a program, so that the email addresses of your hackathon participants are in some Excel file on someone's laptop, and we think that Twitter's quite a rich source of developers coming in, but we don't really know. And this fragmentation just means you're missing out on insights. Quite often this translates to the need for a CRM, but also any sort of holistic data strategy so that all of these various touch points start to become something unified. And when you're seeing developers coming into your program, you're able to actually generate some insight as to which channels are the most powerful and where to shift your budget to. And it also helps you over time observe some of these trends that we're seeing. We all know TikTok is blowing up. The hash developer tag on TikTok has had close to 1 billion views. And this is, everyone's obsessing about winning Gen Z developers. Well, if you're actually able to look at your program and see some of these trends, then you can actually generate a bit more insight than just looking at generic market trends. Moving on to that final segment of the wheel, developer experience. Developer experience, definitely we can, as a starting point, borrows a lot of good practice from user experience, but these are not synonymous. But starting with some of those best practices, we know that good user experience means things are easy, things are intuitive, few obstructions. And that gives us a good place to start. But developer journeys are a lot more complex than typical user journeys. They occur over multiple sessions. They involve all these touch points of testing products in sandboxes, doing test API calls, evaluating documentation, et cetera, et cetera. And so having good developer experience across all of these touch points is an absolute prerequisite. How do you measure something that's quite nebulous like that? Well, I'll tell you that what I don't think quite works. We sometimes encounter programs where the absolute core metric that people care about is registered developers. But that's not a strong indicator of, or it's not even a measure of your developer experience if you're only worried about the gross number of people who've signed up for your product, because it's a bit of a vanity metric. It's never going to go down. It's a convenient metric for internal reporting because it's only ever going to go up, and at worst it will flatline if developers stop coming in. But that number won't dip. So when we're talking about how do you measure developer experience, I like to think of the thing you should really care about is attrition. Developers, when they've had enough of your product, if they're not having great developer experience, they won't necessarily even let you know about it. They won't, with fanfare, depart with a big bang. They'll just quietly disappear and go elsewhere, and you won't even notice it, especially if you're only tracking registered developers, their account will still exist. Their departure is invisible to you. So I like to look at activity, by which I mean, depending on your product or your market, the relevant time frame for this metric can vary from days to months. But let's say 30 days activity. And if someone hasn't logged into their account or made an API call or logged into the developer portal in that time, then they're inactive. And that can be an attrition metric. And that's something to monitor over time. And if your attrition metric is going up, then that's a strong indicator that your developer experience is poor. And then you can go back to this is probably time to go back to the research phase. Explore, is there a problem with our sandbox? Is our documentation not up to scratch? But you're not going to see any of that if you're just looking at the gross number of developers who've signed up for your program. Feel very passionately about this one too. Everybody wants to grow community. Audience is not the same as community. When you're worried about the size of your audience, you're trying to grow audience, you might look at how many followers you have or how many likes your post got. They are useful indicators of audience, but that's not telling you if you've got a community. Community, by its definition, is multi-directional. It's collaborative, it's inclusive, and those one-directional follow metrics, they're not telling you if you've got a community. So community, we're going to have to look at different measures for that. I favor two. I think retention is the first. So it's kind of the opposite of the one I was just talking about with attrition. Retention is, are people sticking around? And the second is engagement. Are those people who are sticking around, are they collaborating? Are they participating? Are they answering each other's questions? Are they commenting? Are they supporting each other? So those two measures, retention and engagement, those are actually much more of an indicator of whether you've got a community, whether you're starting to grow a community, than some of those vanity metrics that just follow account, which is far more about reach. Hand in hand with community is the notion of elevating champions, by which I mean identifying those people within the community who are already doing the behaviors that you want to encourage. They're supporting other developers, they're sharing posts, they're creating their own content, and elevating them to positions where they can support the growth of the community. These programs exist on something of a continuum between really formal evangelist programs where these are salaried individuals and that's their job, is to run hackathons and meetup groups and so on and so forth. But elevating champions can be as modest as just resharing their posts, liking their posts, giving them a small budget for running their own meetup groups in their local community. But this is how, by identifying those people in the community and elevating them to positions where they're encouraged to continue those behaviors, that's where we start to talk about real growth. So community and elevating champions kind of go hand in hand. Which brings us back to the flywheel that Gary introduced. The most important thing I think I can say here is that once you've completed all of this work, you're only just getting started. This isn't just a ring that you go around once and then your work is done. The very notion of a flywheel implies that it's a lot of hard yards to get started. It's quite expensive to get this wheel turning. But through growth, through community, it starts to move a bit quicker. And the incremental effort of bringing new developers into a program becomes less. You could even consider a metric for this as something like cost per acquisition or even cost per developer, where initially it's going to be very expensive to bring your first 100 developers into a program, but hopefully over time, through these efforts, through good developer experience, through building a community, through elevating champions, that cost per developer starts to go down. That's quite enough from me. I'm sorry I ran at the mouth there. There was a lot to get through. Like I say, come and find me, come and find Richard, Gary afterwards. We're doing the free consultations, but I'll hand it over to Gary for the wrap. Thank you.
Not much else from me. We're probably just about over time. Like Tom said, there's a bunch in there. Hopefully there's something in there that resonated for everyone. And if you want to come find us, hopefully this QR code works and you can grab 30 minutes of Tom, myself, or Richard's time over the next couple days. So we'll be around. Do we have time for questions?
We'll take a few questions.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was incredibly thorough. Also, for those who've not yet read the Stack Overflow data, he's being a little modest. He read it for us and wrote about it. So I recommend looking up that blog post because it was a really, really nice synopsis of the data.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, questions. Who has questions? I have one.
Take it.
So one of the things that you highlighted was the importance of the different phases of data and research throughout that flywheel process. I'm sure all of us have run into moments of having limited budget, limited time. Research can take a long time, so sometimes by the time you're done with the research, you've moved on to the next thing. So for folks who are thinking about spinning up research initiatives, particularly for nascent developer marketing programs, where would you recommend that they start? Or what kind of questions would you recommend? How should they refine the questions so they use that time and money wisely?
Yeah.
Like kind of the P0, P1, P2, if you will.
This actually gives me a chance to call back on something that a professor in grad school, who was a statistics professor, always said. So the first two phases of the discovery phase, we put out there because that is work that you can do to varying different levels. You could spend weeks and weeks and weeks on it, but you could also spend a day doing the stakeholder interviews, and you could spend a day doing the secondary research. Those are the best two places to start if you're a one-person team, if you have very limited time and budget. And my professor from grad school would always say, and when you get into primary research, call a statistician. That's, if you're going to outsource anything, it's the primary research, because that is hard and expensive.
Excellent.
The other piece I would add to that is it's really important to remember that when you're doing this research, you're generating hypotheses. You're not generating facts that are set in stone and we'll print a big poster on the wall and that's our personas forevermore. You're generating hypotheses. You then want to test these with data and iterate on them. And over time, that truth might adapt and might shift. And so whether it's a really modest piece of research or it's a huge piece of research, all you're doing is generating hypotheses for future testing.
Spoken like a true scientist there. Outstanding. Any other question? Oh, we got a question. Yes.
Yeah. So, hi. One of the last things you mentioned was that a lot of the value comes in from, I forgot what you were calling it, not community activation, but highlighting certain communities.
Elevating champions.
Yeah. Okay. I'm wondering, besides sharing their posts or things like that, have you seen any other creative approaches to that? Like, what can you actually do?
Yeah, at the sort of the next level up, we've seen literally providing the pizza and beers at a hackathon or a meetup group. And it gets bigger from there. Some swag for your meetup group who are meeting once a month. And getting further and further along, this can be, we want to make you a mod in our Discord channel because you're really great at answering questions. And then at the top end, it can be, we want you to be a champion and run our champions program and help us scale this over time and give them an actual salary to do this job full time. And so it really does exist on this continuum where it can be really simple micro behaviors at one end to a full-time job at the other.
Great. And I think we have time for one more. We'll take one more question.
So my question is almost aligning with what Kathy just spoke about. So we are trying to do a primary research with developers. Apart from the research that's already existing, what's your take or advice on how to even get them to say a yes to participate in the survey, unless you're not a Stack Overflow or Reddit or any other programs out there?
Yeah, so there's two things you can do. The first is if you are fortunate enough to have a large developer community that's engaged and active, start there because they're going to be the ones with a little bit more incentive and investment in the platform product tool. I realize that is often not the case, and at the end of the day, it comes down to having access to a panel that has developers and money. You got to make it worth their time. And the problem with developers, as opposed to running like consumer research, for instance, where it's very cheap per person to do it, is developers are expensive. Primary developer research is expensive. So if there's one takeaway I can give you, it's going to be expensive.
So much of what you shared resonated with me over my last decade-plus journey, including making some of those tough decisions around budget, panels, statisticians, things like that. To conclude, Catchy will be here all week, or all 2 days. So please find them, continue to ask the questions, read the blog post. It's fantastic. And thank you once again for helping create this space for us. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.